First off, I'm shooting with a 50mm lens. This is a really fast lens. It's a 1.1. I have this set right now at a 2.8. And so I have some objects behind me here. I have this fixture over here, which is my key light in the studio. And then I have this fixture in the background, which is my backlight or fill light there. And they're set about 3.5 feet, maybe 4 feet away from each other. And then I'm about 1.5 feet in front of this one. And as you can see, the depth of field is very shallow. You can't see this writing here very clearly, just like you can't see and the writing back there is probably even fuzzier. In fact, if I move back and forth here, you'll see that my glass is my face. I move in and out of a focal plane that's set for depth of field. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to close the aperture. And as I close that aperture, it's going to start pulling things into focus, like this depth of field comes in here, and then finally the rear one comes in as well. Now I've gone a little bit darker because the video chip of my camera is trying to compensate for what's going on, and it's gone beyond its limits. But that's not the point. The point here is that you can see how depth of field has increased. The focal plane, the things that are in focus, has deepened while closing down that lens. So I have that backlight and this light. Now as I go back to the f.2, you'll see that depth of field then go shallow and come right back up to this plane here at about a 2.8. All right, so that's kind of the first part of your assignment, is to experiment with that depth of field. As a photojournalist, those are the tools that you're going to need to help you tell your stories, to go through and show what's in focus and what's not in focus within your depth of field, within your frame. Getting a little bit editorial, but we'll talk about that, more about that as we get into the semester. So the next clip up is going to get into exposure, going underexposed, and then going overexposed, okay? Now we're going to talk about exposure, and right now I'm at a relatively good exposure for what's going on. I'm relatively shallow as far as my depth of field, but that's not what we're really talking about. This is the second part of your assignment, and that is to lock in the other variables. You're going to lock in your ISO, and you're going to lock in your shutter speed, and now you're going to go through and adjust your aperture. So I'm going to adjust this aperture. It's going to go from an f4, and it's going to go to a 5.6, and then it's going to go one more over to an f8. I know these numbers are different than what you have on your assignment, but this is a fast lens and the whole scale is going to move. So right now I should be relatively underexposed. So now I'm going to take it back to an f4, and then from an f4 I'm going to go to a 2.8, and then I'm going to go to a 2, and let me go one more stop just to make it really exposed, overexposed. So it should be really bright now, more overexposed than what is necessary. Okay, so let me bring it back to 4, to an f4. So in the video on exposure, the main video that you watched at the top of the modules, I don't know if you remember Matt in the kayak, and we went through and looked at overexposure and underexposure. That's a snowplow going by the barn here. It's snowing right now as we're doing this. But I demonstrated what overexposure and underexposure looks like, and that's again the second part of the assignment. That's what I want you to do, is to find your median exposure. In this case it was an f4. I'm going to ask you to try to do it at an f8 because you have more exposure room to work with here. But with this lens at an f4, and then we went to a 2.8, and then we went to a 2, and then we went the other way from an f4 to a 5.6, and then to an f8, okay? So you should have 10 photographs to submit for this assignment, all right? And if you need help on that workflow and how to get those photographs up, let me know. You know how to find me on Canvas, okay? Thanks for watching.